Megan Amundson has spent 20 years in the nonprofit sector, with the last 10 as an executive director and major gift officer. She understands the resource constraints of small nonprofits and what they can invest in to boost their fundraising efforts. And she's rebuilt fundraising programs for multiple organizations. So take it away, Megan. Oh, let's just say a word, Megan, maybe you can say it too, about how you'd like people to participate in kind of your plan for questions and discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you. My name is Megan Amundson. I am now a nonprofit coach and consultant, doing coaching and training to help organizations run really strong nonprofits and raise more money from individual donors. I'm looking through the list of folks who are joining us today, and I don't recognize any names of someone who I might have worked with back in the day when I was in the environmental community for the first 10 years that I was working in the nonprofit community, but it's a lot of fun to be here with the Mass Land Trust Coalition today at the conference. So a little bit of housekeeping. So I am going to be sharing a slideshow presentation and kind of walking through it. While I do that, you are welcome to, and I encourage you to engage me in the chat. I will be asking you questions for you to put answers in the chat. You can also include questions in the chat. Rob has very kindly volunteered to kind of watch the chat for questions, and I'm going to stop after each section and see if there are any questions during the section. At the end of it, I'm hoping we have time for me to turn the slideshow off, for us to come back into a Zoom meeting, which is lovely that we have that. You can take yourself on camera, you can take yourself on mic, and you can ask questions and kind of raise your hand at that point. But you can also keep it in the chat. If you do ask questions in the chat, please do Rob a favor and write a question in front of it so that Rob can find it. Otherwise, it might get buried in the things that I'm asking you guys to engage with me in. With that, I am going to share my screen. We're going to go right into the PowerPoint. I'm just going to get my slides ready. Okay, so today we're talking about what donors want. When you're thinking about a fundraising program, I know this can seem like a mystery, which is why we're talking about it today. And it's one of the things I really enjoy talking with organizations and with my clients about why donors give and what it is that they want. And once you understand that, it makes it a lot easier to give that to them and makes it a lot more seamless to ask them for money in return. So what we're going to do is we are going to start out with a question for you guys in the chat. So I'm asking you right now, why do you give? So today we're talking really exclusively about individual donors, because almost 70% of all philanthropy comes from individuals. So they are the backbone of a lot of the philanthropy that you are looking for. And having a really strong individual donor program will support your organization to sustain in the long term. So I'm also going to go ahead and assume that you are all donors, right? You're nonprofit leaders, you understand the importance of philanthropy. So take a minute, think about why you give to charities that you give to, and then put your top reason in the chat. All right, Leslie says she believes in the mission. All right. Anyone else have a reason that they like to give? All right. Because Rob says, because of a relationship with those asking. Cause is important to me. Feel engaged with the organization. All right. Today we're going to be, for recognition. Rob says, Rob, that's not true for you. You don't give for recognition. Okay, so we're going to be talking about 4 ways you might solicit your donors. But before we do that, I want to talk about why donors give and kind of really drill down on that. And here's the thing. Donors give because there's impact that they want to have in the world. There's change they want to see. There's a problem they want to solve. But they can't do it themselves. They can't go out and protect all this land that you are all protecting. They need to team up with you to do it. They don't have the resources. Even Bill Gates can't eradicate infectious disease by himself. He's not a public health expert. He has to team up with other organizations who do have that expertise and have the capacity and can go out and do that. but he gives because he invests in that impact, and your donors are investing in your impact too. So we're going to start with why donors give to you and why they continue to give to you. All right, it's why donors stay. Or I'm sorry, we're going to start with why donors leave, and then we're going to come back to why donors stay. So why donors give to you, but don't give again. So the thing that I love about fundraising is it is an art and a science, and there is a tremendous amount of data that backs up a lot of the best practice that fundraisers use. And some of that data includes surveys around what donors think. So this is a survey that was done quite a while ago, but holds true because what donors want doesn't really change all that much over time. So why donors give to you and then stop giving to you? 54% say they can no longer afford it. And I'm going to drill into these a little bit because I want you thinking about thinking a little more deeply about some of these responses. So if a donor says they can no longer afford to give, we're still in a global pandemic. We all know people who have been really impacted financially by this pandemic. We know that it is true that there are people who were able to be charitable in the past and today cannot. That is true. But saying that I can no longer afford to give does not mean that I'm not philanthropic still. It may mean that I've actually just changed how I think and strategize about my philanthropy. It may mean I'm giving to fewer organizations. It may mean that I've, really focused my giving in one area because I have less capacity to give. It doesn't mean I've stopped giving altogether. So if a donor says to you, I'm not giving because I can't afford to anymore, it may not be because they're not being philanthropic still. It may be that for some reason, they are no longer prioritizing you. So let's talk about that a little bit more. 36% say others are more deserving. So if a donor ever tells you that others are more deserving, it is because you have not done a good job of telling your donors about the impact that they are having with you, right? They've given to you. They don't necessarily know where the money's gone. They don't know if they've had the impact they want, but other organizations that they give to are telling them that that the donor has had impact with them, the exact impact that that donor wants. And so they look more deserving. This is not necessarily a comment on your mission. It's not a comment on your programs. It's a comment on how you are communicating all of that back to your donors. 18% say poor service or communication. Again, this is unlikely to be a comment on your actual programs, although I'm sure that does happen. This is about how you've communicated the work that you're doing and the impact your donor is having with you back to your donors. 16% no longer give because they have passed. My first year as an executive director, I lost 5 major donors, 4 because they passed away and 1 because they left our service area. And that was almost a staff salary. So I'm not going to brush aside the fact that sometimes our donors die, but we are going to talk about that a little bit later. 13% say they never got thanked for donating. Now, I'm going to go ahead and assume that all of you thank your donors. I think that you are all, doing that, really basic thank you for your donors. But I will say there are organizations, I happen to know, I've had some board members fess up to me that, their organization has gone a year without thanking their donors. And I know people who give and who watch what they get back really closely, who say to me, oh, I gave to this organization and I never got anything back. But I don't think that happens often enough for 13% of donors to say they never got thanked. And here's what I think is happening instead. I think that the organization sent a thank you letter, but that letter was a tax receipt, and that letter was about the organization, talked about the organization's mission, talked about what the organization was doing, and acknowledged the amount that a donor get. So if me as a donor, I get this letter, about the organization, amount I gave, I think, oh, this is for my accountant. This is a tax document. This is not a thank you. I don't read this document and feel appreciated for having given this gift. So being thanked is about your donor feeling appreciated. It's about the feeling, not the words thank you. So you may have sent something out. Most likely it was a letter that was a tax receipt, and your donor didn't feel thanked by that. So 13% say they never got thanked. I bet they did get thanked, but they didn't get thanked well. So they don't remember it as a thank you. 9% have no memory of supporting. And that's actually even worse because it means you just fell off the donor's radar screen entirely. And I will say, I'm saying you, I'm not saying any of you are doing this, but I want you to think about this in terms of, are your donors thinking these things, right? No memory of supporting means you didn't engage them. It means you didn't tell them what impact they have. You thanked them, maybe, hopefully, but they don't feel appreciated and thanked enough to even remember having given in the first place. And that's a really tough place to be with a donor if they have no memory of even supporting your organization. 8% say they have no idea how the money were used. Again, that is about whether or not they know what impact they had with you. They wanted to have impact. Did they get it with you? They don't know. 5% thought the charity did not need them. Now, that's also pretty sad because that's not a question of need. That's a question of communication. Did the organization actually demonstrate some need? You share what kind of impact a donor could have with them. 5% of donors say, no, they didn't. The charity just didn't share that with them. So these are the reasons that donors don't give again. But we have another study to show why donors do give again, right? It's the other side of the coin. The good thing is they're pretty comparable, but I love my studies. So, let's look at that. So donors perceive an organization to be effective, right? And a donor perceives an organization to be effective because the organization has told a donor that they are effective. That's really all that boils down to, is really good communication about the impact a donor had. A donor knows what to expect within each interaction, right? Again, that's a communication thing. They know they're going to get a thank you. They know they're going to be told what impact their gift had. They know that they're going to be invited to things and engaged. They receive a timely thank you, right? They get a thank you, they feel appreciated, and they got that in a timely manner, not a year later. And they got that, quickly so that that gift was reinforced for them. They receive opportunities to make their views known. This is slightly aside, certainly aside from what we're talking about today, but there are ways that you can engage your donors. They like to feel bought into the work you're doing. My caveat with that is if you ask for feedback from your donors, you have to be prepared to take it. Because if your donors give you feedback and they don't feel heard and they don't feel like you did anything with it, it's not a good donor experience. But when they have opportunity to say, I want to be part of something, I want to volunteer, I want to do things with you, and they have an opportunity to have some say in that, that is a great way to keep donors engaged with you. Your donor feels like they're part of an important cause. Why does that cause feel important? Because your donor inherently cares about it, but also because you have communicated that there is impact that comes with participating in your organization. They feel their involvement is appreciated. Again, we come back to the thank you, right? They feel thanked and thanked well. They receive info showing who's being helped. If we take the who out of there for the purposes of land trust, they show what the impact is. So here's the great news. What a donor cares about really boils down to three things: to thanking them well, to engaging them, having opportunities for them to really, have a part in your community, have a part in the work that you're doing, and you show them their impact because that's why they're giving to you in the first place. So once you know what donors want, soliciting them becomes a really different mindset. So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat what your biggest fear is about asking a donor for money. Because I hear a lot of fears when I work with clients about things they worry about when the word fundraising comes out. And a lot of people have fears around fundraising. So type in the chat your biggest fear. Asking too much, too little, having the same message every year. They won't take my call. All right. How to start the conversation. So now I have another question for you. I'm curious how many of you worry about how often you ask your donors for money. So I want you to type in, we ask too often, if that's what you worry about. We don't ask often enough, if that's what you worry about. You can say nope, if you don't worry about any of that. Don't know how often to ask, Leslie says. We ask enough, says Katie. Nope, just worry about repetitive messaging. We don't ask enough. Okay, staff have different views on how often, Debbie says. Also not uncommon. All right, so notice in the list of why donors leave and why they stop giving to you, nowhere on that list is because donors got asked too often. So here's what I want you to think about when you're thinking about fundraising. You have hangups about money. You have hangups about money because everyone has hangups about money, but your hangups are different than my hangups, are different than Rob's hangups, are different than Emily's hangups. Everyone has their own hangups, and it's formed by culture and community and family views and personal experience with money. Oftentimes people bring these hangups to their fears about fundraising, and then they project their hangups onto other people, i.e. their donors. And here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to take your biases around money and project them onto your donors, because while you are a donor, you are not the donor profile of who gives to your organizations. What you like or don't like or want or don't want does not necessarily reflect the preferences of your donor base. And I don't want you to confuse the two. Right? So understand your personal biases around money and understand that they're yours, and then understand that you are not your donor. So projecting them onto your donor is not helpful because you know what your donors want. They want to have impact. They want to be engaged in that impact, and they want to feel appreciated for being part of that impact with you. They are your partners. And so if you take anything away from this presentation, outside of that little bit of mind shift, here's the one thing I want you to take away. If you know what your donors want, the more often you ask your donors for money, the more money you raise. Now, obviously, there are limitations on this, but I promise you, no one at this conference is getting anywhere near the limitations of how often you should ask for money that will annoy your donor, because your donors get what they want, which is understanding the impact, which is being thanked, which is being engaged. So we are going to jump into talking about the different ways that you might ask an individual for money. We're going to talk about direct mail. We're going to talk about email fundraising. We're going to talk about individual asks. We're going to talk about planned giving. But we're going to talk in a very big picture, very high level, thinking about strategy for your organization. We're not going to drill down. You could spend years becoming expert in each of these. So we're only going to make so much progress today. But I want you to keep in mind that all of these ways of soliciting your donors are never just a solicitation. There are opportunities to give your donors what they want to, the thanks, the impact, the engagement. So when you're thinking about solicitation, when you're thinking about what it is you're putting out in the world to your donors, I want you to think about, are they getting what they want first before I ask? Because no donor wants to be thought of as an ATM. No donor only wants to hear from you when they're being asked for money. They have needs too. But now you know them, so you can do that. And we're going to jump right in to talk about direct mail. So if you send anything in the mail to your donors, you are sending direct mail. Now, I'm kind of curious because I want to have a sense of where folks are in our little group today. So write in the chat how many times per year you send a mail solicitation to your donors. Just ballpark. Twice, 2 to 3 times, twice, 3 times. All right, two newsletters with, okay. So I'm seeing kind of some coalescence between 2 to 3 times per year, and that's okay. you could do more. Well, that's okay, Robin. I get that sometimes you don't know these things. When you're really new to an organization, there's so much to learn. Okay, so this is why I want you to think about direct mail and maybe using it more. All right, first of all, direct mail has a higher response rate, certainly higher than email fundraising. But while direct mail doesn't have the kind of response rate it had 30 years ago, it is still pretty high in terms of kind of that lump, that kind of being able to solicit a large number of people through one avenue. You are going to get a higher response rate. And it's still a significant portion of a nonprofit's fundraising revenue. Direct mail lifts up other channels. There's something about receiving that thing in the mail that is concrete, that reminds people that they care about you, that they gave to you once, that they want to think about giving to you again. It reminds them that maybe they got that email from you. It reminds them that, oh, Rob gave me a call last month that I didn't return, because sometimes I don't return calls, and that's on me and not on Rob. But it helps people think about other fundraising channels, like when you get something in the mail. It's personal, right? You can personalize direct mail to a pretty granular extent, by name. You can talk about how much they gave. You ask specific amounts based on what they're giving. There's lots of fields you can merge to make direct mail really personal. It's memorable because it's physical, right? The thing about direct mail, and I heard the statistic about a year ago from one of the direct mail experts who I follow, and she said that on average, people read a direct mail piece 7 times before they recycle it. Now, that was a really interesting statistic for me because I'm a direct mail giver. I get a fair amount of direct mail. But what I do is also something that other folks do, is they set it aside. They physically set it aside to be looked at later, and they actually look at later, because unlike email, which when you set it aside, it just gets buried in your inbox and you never think about it again. At some point, you have to sort through that pile of the things you set aside in the mail, and it reminds you over and over again that you care about this organization, you think about this organization, and it triggers you thinking about philanthropy. It gets read. Now, it may get scanned. You really have about 7 seconds of somebody's attention, and given COVID, that's actually shrinking. So you want to make sure that it's entirely scannable. But if you use design, your eye will track the big kind of pieces that you want your donors to be reading from that direct mail. So some people will take the envelope, be like, oh yeah, I gave to them, throw it in the recycling. A lot of people do actually open it and read it, or at least scan it. And donors like it. And I have an asterisk here because this is not actually a statistic on fundraising. This is a statistic from the United States Postal Service about how many people actually like to get mail. And if you're one of those pieces of mail, then we're going to lump it in there and say donors like to hear from you too. So we're going to talk a little bit about best practice, and I'm going to walk you through a direct mail piece that I received. So send more. You can send a lot of direct mail, and as long as you're giving your donors what they need, they're not actually going to find it annoying. I think people are really afraid that donors are just, drowning in direct mail, and it's not really the case. They care about you. You're giving them what they need. They actually want to hear from you. They actually want to know what's going on. The longer, the better. And I know I'm going to get pushback from this group because this is an environmental group, but this is psychology, not logical thought. The longer the longer your direct mail piece is, the higher your response rate to it will be. So there's a gentleman I follow named Jeff Brooks, who is a direct mail specialist, and he's a thought leader in this space. And I actually heard him say once that he sent out a 12-page direct mail letter. And if he could do it every time he sent out direct mail, he would, because it had the highest response rate. It's just that once you get that big, then you have to send more postage, and then it gets more expensive. But if you're trying to keep your direct mail to 1 page, think about extending it to 4 pages, designed with a lot of white space. It doesn't have to be a tremendous amount of text, but think about having it longer, because there's a psychology there that the longer it is, the higher your response rate will be. you want to make your text about your donor, because what your donor needs and what your donor wants to know is how they have impact with you. So if your direct mail piece is all about your organization, then it's not a frame that's really going to engage your donor, because what they are looking for is how they have impact with you. Show need, right? One of those reasons that donors stopped giving is because they thought others were more deserving. They didn't know what an organization was using it for. You actually have to make a case in your direct mail. Why this? Why now? And you want to be specific. Now, I work with a lot of organizations, small organizations, who send out 1, maybe 2 mail pieces a year. And there's always this tendency to want to say, give whatever you can. The problem is, psychologically, give whatever you can has a much lower response rate to give $50, $100, $125 today. Having those specific dollar amounts actually helps your donors kind of anchor their thinking around their giving. And if you're able to have the sophistication to kind of cater what that range is for your donors based on their previous giving, you will see higher response. Make it urgent. It's part of the case, it's part of showing need, but you have to demonstrate why a donor should give to you today. If not, then the donor's like, well, I'll give next time, or they don't seem to really need it right now. I don't know why I'd give right now. I'll just give in December instead, right? Without an urgency, your donor doesn't have necessarily a reason to give to this particular solicitation. Include a reply slip. I know a lot of organizations, particularly much smaller ones, that don't include reply slips with their direct mail. And this is mostly the case when they only send 1 per year. But I'm going to encourage you to include a reply slip, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, and change up the size and color. So you get a higher open rate and a higher response rate if your direct mail doesn't look the same every time it goes out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at an example. So this is a direct mail I got from Defenders of Wildlife. I'm also going to give you all examples from large national nonprofits, because they shop this stuff out. They have experts doing it. So why not learn from what these kind of expert shops are doing? So we're going to start with short paragraphs. There isn't a paragraph here that's longer than 3 lines. Because again, if you assume you have 7 seconds of my attention, having a wall of text there overwhelms, and I put it down, I put it aside, and I don't pick it up again. So I want to feel like this is something I can scan, I can get the gist of. If you really catch my attention, I will stop and read it. But a wall of text is really overwhelming. And you want to use design. Again, if you've got 7 seconds of my attention, using bold and italics, underlining, using bullets, that helps me understand where my eyes should go and what are the core pieces I should be pulling out from this to understand. Don't bury the lead. The most read parts of direct mail piece are the first sentence and the PS. So if your first sentence or first paragraph is talking about your mission and why you were founded and why you exist, then you have missed your opportunity to really capture your donor's attention. So you can see here that, the first sentence here is, who do you turn to when things are at their worst? This is an interesting question, because it actually makes me think, who do I turn to? And then I think, well, why are you asking me? And they get to that, right? So they kind of hook me. If I'm reading that first sentence, I'm actually thinking about it and I'm wondering. And again, you want to make your direct mail about your donor, right? This is addressed to me. Anything I get that's addressed dear friend goes immediately in the recycling, because you have my name. You should be able to make this about me. And then they say, today I'm turning to you, right? This is about me. They're coming to me because I'm important and because they need me. Show need. All right, so there's this entire paragraph that's in italics that has some bold, where they're talking about the threats under the Trump administration, how much damage has been done, how urgent it is to fix this damage and create hope. Right? As somebody who supports the organization, I get exactly what they're saying. I don't have to go into great detail about what the damage was. I understand what they're talking about. And that creates urgency, right? There's this damage. It needs to be taken care of. We We can't continue like this. We need to fix it now. And then specific, right? They're asking me for specific amounts of money to help me anchor my thinking around that philanthropy. $50, $65, $75. Now you have a sense of how much I get to Defenders of Wildlife. But this is really helpful as I'm thinking through that. Include a reply slip. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but the reply slip serves a number of functions. So if you're not using it today, you should be using it. For one, you code each reply slip to each mailing. So it helps you track and it helps you test your mailings and understand which mailings are doing better than others. It also helps you understand how long your donors are holding on to your mailings, because if you were like me, like we got reply slips from mailings, in the mail with a check for mailings we had sent like 3, 4, 5 months ago. And then you kind of understand like how long are your folks holding on to their mail. But it also gives you opportunity to actually market other things and to learn about your donors when they do send in a reply slip. So there's other kind of marketing content you can put on here. So like this is like not even anything to do with my gift or my name. This is the backside of the ASPCA's reply slip asking me questions that they're actually going to use, right? They're asking, what kind of animal do I have? Because if I'm a cat person and you're sending me all dog information, I don't care, right? They can actually send me cat information if I'm a cat person, and I'm going to respond much better to anything that they send me. So they're asking for really substantive information for their marketing purposes, and information I'm happy to give because I don't want to get dog information if I'm a cat person. So I'm going to wrap up this very quick, high level direct mail piece. Before I go into email fundraising, I do want to ask Rob if we had any questions that we should be addressing around direct mail specifically.
Well, one, I think, is this question about whether to include a photo, if a photo is impactful, like a picture of a land you're conserving or something.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about other collateral that you can include in direct mail, because sometimes it's an asset and sometimes it's a liability. So photos, great. What you don't want to include, which is interesting data, I think, don't include a generic brochure within your direct mail piece. It will tank your direct mail. And again, I get this from Jeff Brooks, who has spent his entire career testing and writing and doing direct mail. So generic brochure, don't do it. What is particularly high response to, which I think is really useful for this community, is maps of literally anything. Include a map, and statistically you will get a higher response rate. So yes, include things like an event listing of upcoming events, include things like opportunities to engage, include things like photos, particularly if you have new land or new assets that you have acquired and are protecting, or if it's part of your messaging, if you're talking about how important it is for kind of upkeep of your trails, including some pictures of that, I think is really powerful.
Another question about when you say change up the size, color, would that mean the outer envelope so that they're more apt to open the mail, or do we assume they're opening it, but so do more work on design of the internal piece?
Well, you do want to be really thoughtful of the design of the internal piece, because you want to be thinking about how it's read. But when I say kind of change up the color and the shape, I am talking about the envelope. So it is like the shape of the piece. So you can send out something square, for when mailing, and something something a normal A9, or you can like have a shorter version. But just thinking about kind of different ways. The question is, there's a cost benefit there, because some size mailings get more expensive. So you want to keep that in mind. But if you can kind of change the shape and the size, it helps shake it up for your donors. Any other questions on direct mail?
Well, I have a feeling you may be going there, but David mentions that, and perhaps he's referring to the reply slip, but encouraging more online donations is something they're doing more of. So, there's an intersection perhaps between your print mail and your online, which perhaps you're going to go to.
I will a little bit. I will also say that most organizations are not including the credit card information here anymore. I find it kind of interesting that the ASPCA still is. I don't actually advocate you doing that because there are a lot of kind of organizational liabilities of keeping that data, and you don't want to have it in-house. But you will find that a lot of people, because direct mail lifts up other fundraising channels, a lot of people who get direct mail will go and give online. And yes, if you are asking for them to give by credit card, encouraging them to go online is great. It was harder back in the day with direct mail because it was harder to get people to change mediums from like something in the mail to then go to their computer. But culturally, we are much more comfortable giving online. So I think that that's a much better option than having them write credit card information on a reply slip. And then I'll go into, I'll touch on a little bit of the inner working between your email and your direct mail. So I'm going to jump into why use email fundraising. It's cost effective, right? You don't have to do postage. You don't have to send it to a printer. Nobody has to stuff it. It is essentially free to send out, except you pay for your CRM, but you're probably paying for your CRM for other reasons. It's essentially the cost of labor. It's easy, right? Email is just an easier medium to do. You can do more of them. You can be more thoughtful about them. It can be as personal as direct mail. You can have all those fields, certainly your first name field. You can have gift fields in there depending on how your CRM is set up, but you can make email feel really personal to the person receiving it. You can also test it really quickly, right? Your response to email, you get back in a matter of days, maybe a week. People aren't holding on to that email forever. It's not like the months that you might be getting responses to a direct mail piece. So it takes much longer to test whether that direct mail piece worked or not. You can test almost instantaneously whether a fundraising appeal worked or not. You can get higher engagement, right? Email is an easier two-way street. You can get a reply slip back, you can get a survey back in the mail, but it's much easier for someone to whip off an email to you than it is for them to return something in the mail. And it's easier to have urgency with email, right? If you have a deadline coming up next week, something came up, it's really urgent, you cannot send a direct mail piece about it. Like, it's just not logistically possible. And given that the Postal Service has been much less dependable in recent years, you can't even guarantee that having an urgent deadline on direct mail will be delivered in time to meet that deadline. It has happened a lot over the last years. I've been hearing from organizations, like largely national organizations that are putting like actual dates on direct mail, that people are receiving that after the date has passed. And then that's just a waste. Donors get them, think, oh, I missed it, and it's gone. So it's not effective in direct mail, but super effective in email. And a little bit of best practice. Right? Send as many as you have the capacity to send. As long as you're giving your donors what they want, they're getting updated on what the impact their giving has, they're being thanked well, and they're being engaged. It doesn't matter how many email fundraising solicitations you send, but including them in like a story arc can be really effective. So if you're starting out with, an engagement email talking about that impact that engagement has, following up with a fundraising ask after that, because more needs to be done, that's actually a really great kind of story arc to be sending out to your donors on a more regular basis. They get the impact, they get thanked, and they get asked again to have more impact with you. Okay, so I'm going to go through an email I got from Emily's List. And just a little bit of, again, with the big national nonprofits, they farm all this stuff out. But here's what I wanted to kind of point out. Again, short paragraphs. Now, in direct mail, we have control over how people read it. And when I said there wasn't a paragraph that was more than 3 lines, a 3-line paragraph via email can look really different depending on the device you're reading it on, right? So this email, on a huge monitor looks, pretty short sentences, but if I'm reading it on my phone and I have what I think is, 3 lines, it could be an entire wall of text, which makes it really overwhelming. So having a paragraph that is 1 sentence maybe 2 sentences is standard for email. So you will notice that none of these paragraphs are really longer than 2 sentences, with the exception of the ask, because the ask has 2 sentences that are no more than 5 words each. Right? Again, use design. You are not going to use your direct mail text and send it via email, right? Email is a slightly different beast in terms of how you use it to communicate. It's going to be shorter. It's going to be more concise, significantly shorter, because you want longer direct mail pieces to get a response via direct mail. But the design holds true, right? You want to be using bold, italics, underlines. You want to be center justifying or left justifying to shake it up so that as I'm looking at it, my eye tracks. The nice thing about Emily's List is they have this added benefit is when they talk about elected officials, the state goes in parentheses, and my eye immediately goes to like, what are those parentheses? Which is a great inherent design tool that they get to use. Again, don't bury the lead. First sentence, PS are the most common that are going to be read. So make sure that that first sentence captures attention. In this case, Democratic pro-choice women are the key to saving our Senate majority. I'm a donor to Emily's List. They know I care about having pro-choice women elected, right? Saying that it's the key, I'm thinking, okay, like, why is it the key? And then they go on to tell me. Yep, there we go. Make it about your donor. Again, right? You have my name, use my name in the email. One call to action in email. Now, you might repeat that one call to action in multiple places in your email, but only one ask. Otherwise, your donors or your readers get overwhelmed and they don't click on anything, or they don't click on the thing you actually want them to click on, right? Be specific. Again, right, there's one call to action. They're talking about me. Am I with them? Am I joining this, community with a very specific ask, right? Again, having a specific ask that kind of anchors people, donors thinking around philanthropy helps get higher response. And here they have a whole list of options for giving, right? I can donate $3 right now, or I can donate all of these amounts. Oop. And that's actually what I have to say about email fundraising. So the hand in glove thing is, your direct mail and your email fundraising should work hand in glove. Whenever you send a direct mail piece out in the mail, you have a sense of when you think it might hit mailboxes. You want to have a similar theme in your email fundraising around that same time so that it kind of reinforces messages. And you are more likely these days to get gifts online than a check in the direct mail. But I don't want you to think that that means that your direct mail isn't effective, because it is going to lift up that email that people are going to forget about almost immediately when it goes in your inbox. So any questions about email before I go on to individual solicitation?
Yeah, there are a couple of good questions. Can you clarify, and you said that direct mail has a higher response rate, but email has higher engagement. Can you say more about what that means?
Sure. So email response rate is less than 1%. It increases every year of how many people are responding to solicitations via email. So the amount is still increasing, but you will get more money, actual dollars in the door from direct mail than you will from email, because the response rate on email is so low. However, it's very easy if you are asking for a donor or someone reading an email to respond. It's very easy for someone to respond to your email, right? They can send off an email to you. So you can get engagement from that, which is not necessarily a gift. It's easier to get engagement, where you can't get that kind of engagement necessarily, or you don't get as high a response from engagement via mail. When your tools for engagement via mail are like send a survey back, or fill out the reply slip and send it back, things like that, you will get a lower response rate from direct mail on that. Is that clarifying?
Yeah. Yeah, another good question. So do you consider all emails fundraising, or would you say a newsletter that also has a donate button
No.
counts? Is that effective?
No, and donate buttons aren't effective. You actually have to solicit the gift for it to be a fundraising email. It needs to be specific. You need to make a case for why to give. So it's similar in theme to direct mail, because your direct mail piece should be you making a case for why a donor has impact, what your vision is, what you're growing toward. Your donor should want to be part of that, and your email should kind of reflect that messaging if it's a fundraising email. Putting a donate button on an email is good practice, but it's not a fundraising email unless you have asked for a gift and made a case for it. And again, being specific about what kind of gift you're asking for really helps.
Well, you just sort of answered my question. So you said it's good practice. So you don't encourage us to drop the donate button from newsletters, et cetera?
No, it's just not a fundraising email if all it has is a donate button.
And another good question, do tools like Venmo help in email solicitation with donations, like different ways to pay?
Yes. That is part of meeting your donors where they are. And every organization has a different donor profile and kind of a different culture of how their donors like to give. So having opportunities for them to give in a variety of ways does kind of take away some of the friction of folks giving, right? Because if you make it hard for them to give, they may just kind of fall off somewhere in the process. But if they're Venmo givers, that they use Venmo regularly and they're really comfortable with that, having opportunities for that is great. I think understanding your donor profile is helpful. So you can try out a bunch of tools, but if you have to pay for them in any way, testing them to see, are they effective? Are your donors using them? Would be really key of determining whether that's a value add to your specific donor base.
Great. So those are all the questions at the moment.
Okay. So we're going to go into individual solicitation, major donor fundraising. I don't call it major donor fundraising. I call it individual donor solicitation because I always get the question, what is a major donor? So we're just going to address that out the gate. So what you in your organization consider a major donor, a mid-level donor, a small dollar donor, kind of however you break up those buckets, is an internal designation based on how much personal attention those donors get. So who is a major donor should be a pool of people large enough to get real personalized attention so that they get more engaged and they are engaged to give more, but small enough so that you have the ability to have that personal touch with them. So again, it's an internal designation based on how much your donors are giving to you. So for some organizations, that's over $1,000. For some organizations, over $20,000. It really depends. But thinking about it as a manageable pool of people who you build relationships with and can have that personal relationship with. Now, when I say personal relationship, it's not always in the form of a meeting. Sometimes it's in the form of really personalized letters. Sometimes it's in the form of texting. Sometimes it's a form of really personalized emails. But it's a relationship that you have built because you've really spent some time getting to know that person, regardless of the medium. Your mid-level donors, they have some automated communication and some individual, personalized communication. So this would be, people who get, maybe you have a larger group of people who get more personalized thank yous, depending on a gift level. That would be its own category under your major donor folks, right? Because they get some personalized attention from you. Your low dollar donors is all essentially automation because you simply don't have the capacity to be paying that kind of attention to people who give you $25 a year. You want them thanked well, you want them to feel appreciated, you want them to know what their impact is, but you can't do that personally. So thinking about that for your organization is a question of looking at your data. How many people can you actually manage to have a relationship with and uphold that relationship throughout the year? So you're not people are falling through the cracks and you're not dropping it. Making sure that it's small enough for you to manage, but not so small that you're like, well, it's 2 people. I have capacity to actually be cultivating more more donors, so that you have enough that you're really building a pipeline for your organization. So with that said, what I'm talking about in this section is really building that relationship with individuals to be able to make a major donor ask, whatever that means for your organization. And you do this because you get higher gift amounts, right? You're building a personal relationship. You understand their giving. You can work people up the giving ladder because you're engaging them. They're getting really well thanked. They have more buy-in to your organization than a $25 donor. It's an efficient use of time, right? You get higher gifts for one meeting a year in like some emails. You're spending, weeks drafting your direct mail, which is fine because it's going out to a really large pool of people. And you spend a lot of time drafting your email fundraising solicitations. But this is like you have that meeting, you make a big ask, you get the ask, it's super efficient. It is very personal. This is as personal as it gets. Again, regardless of the medium that you're using, this is as personal as it gets because you're getting to know a person as an individual as well as a donor to your organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about best practice, and this may open a can of worms for you guys. It tends to, but we'll get started here. The first thing you want to do is build a philanthropic relationship with your donors. So there are lots of relationships you can build with your donors. And we're just going to say major donors because understanding that these are your largest donors who you really want to treat well. You can build any number of relationship with a major donor. You can build a volunteer relationship with them. You can build a board relationship with them. You can build, a lot of different, they can be consulting you on something that they bring expertise to the table. But when you want to ask them for a gift, you have to be very specific that you're building a philanthropic relationship. And they have to know that that is the relationship that you are building with them for them to opt in to having this relationship with you. Which actually, Rob, it gets to your question about like people aren't responding to my calls. That may be your donors not opting in to having that relationship with you because not all of your people want it, right? Some people are very happy to sit in the background writing their one check a year. It's all they're going to do for you. That's fine. That's great. Honor them where they are in giving, but don't invest a lot of time in them because the people you want to invest a lot of time in building a relationship with are the people you identify as donors to your organization before cultivating, and donors who are interested in getting more involved and engaged philanthropically with your organization before you invest a lot of time in cultivating them. So if you are, sitting down with somebody who gave you $500, your question to them, the core reason you're meeting with them is to learn if they're interested in giving more money to your organization. Are they interested in being more engaged with you philanthropically? Would they like to learn more about being more philanthropic with your organization? Would they like to understand how being more generous with your organization has impact? There are a million ways to phrase the question, but you don't invest a lot of time in people who say no to that question. Because you could very legitimately get a response that says, you know what, I'm very comfortable giving my $500 a year. It's, the capacity that I have. I feel like I get a lot of impact with your organization and I love being a part of it, but I'm not going to give you more. In which case, thank you. Thank you so much for that $500 gift. We're going to treat you very well as a $500 donor, but we're not going to invest a lot into making you a larger donor because you've told us that that's not what you're going to do. Every meeting, when you have a personal relationship with a donor, whether it's via email, whether it's writing handwritten letters, which I have done, whether it's, having a Zoom meeting, whether it's, walking your property with a donor, you get the opportunity to thank them and report back impact in every meeting. And because that's what they want, making sure that they get that before your next solicitation is really important. And then you need to make a case. Right? You're making a case in direct mail, you're making a case in your email, but this is you as an individual making an authentic case for your organization. What is the vision for where your organization is going? Why is it important for them to give to you? And why is it important for them to give to you now? The difference is you're making this verbally in a conversation as opposed to writing it in direct mail, as opposed to writing it in email. And you're making a really specific case for a specific donor. Because you may find that a donor has a very specific interest. And so you can address that with them. And that is the beauty of really understanding your donor as an individual, as well as a donor to your organization. Be direct. Now, I say this because it took me a long time to learn this, but when you are building a relationship with a donor, there are things you want to know. There are questions that you have. When you have a question, you get to ask your question. And I certainly encourage you to be really direct about that. I find that donors like knowing what you want to know. They like knowing why they're having a conversation. They like knowing what their impact is. They like knowing things about you. And if there are questions you have about them, where else they give, where does your organization fall in their priority list of giving? How much do they care about your organization? Why do they give to your organization? When there are questions you have, you get to ask them. So before every conversation you have with a donor, you get to think to yourself, what questions do I have? This donor sent me an email. It was a little confusing. They made reference to something. I'm not sure what it is they meant. Don't guess at it. You have a relationship with the donor. You get to ask tactfully, obviously, but you do get to ask. So you never have to kind of dance around understanding what your donor is saying to you. When it's somebody you built a relationship with, you actually get to ask and you get to clarify things and you get to make sure that you walk away understanding what your donor was saying and on the same page with your donor. And being direct is the way that you get there. So I'm giving you all permission to be really direct with the donors that you build relationships with, because that's how you make sure that you're both on the same page and they want you on their page, right? If they are being specific about how they want to be asked, about when they want to be asked, about what that looks like, you want to make sure you understand that when you leave that meeting so that you can honor it. Okay. All right, why planned giving is next, but I am going to stop here to see, Rob, were there questions?
None at this time. Just a reinforcement, Robin comments, it sounds like transparency is key.
Transparency, yes, it is, because your donors can tell when you're hiding things and your donors can tell when you're uncomfortable with something. The thing is, your emotions leak out. So being authentic and being yourself is really important, and being transparent in the ways that you're comfortable being for your organization. Now, if there are things you can't talk about, if there is a court case that your organization involved in, you're not going to be able to talk about that. You can talk about things generally. You don't have to be really specific with donors, but you do want to be transparent with them, if that is helpful, Robin. Or maybe I muddied the waters with that, but there is a difference. You don't have to be overly truthful, but you do want to be transparent. And sometimes there's a really key difference between the two. Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump into plan giving. Rob, remind me again when we're done on this.
We're done at 11:45, so we just have a little over 15 minutes.
Okay, we can get through this. Okay, so if you stay to the end, I'm going to give you a code to download a checklist for plan giving. But first, I want to ask, let me know in the chat if you have a planned giving program. Say yes in the chat or no in the chat if you have an existing program. Yes, says Katie. Great. Okay. All right, I'm getting more yeses than nos, and that doesn't surprise me given that you're land trusts. You already understand the transformational nature of planned gifts, and you receive some of your assets from planned gifts. So what I'm going to talk about in this section is really the basics of planned giving. I'm not going to go into marketing a planned giving program. I'm going into the foundation of what you want to make sure you have in place in case you do decide to then actually launch a marketing program specific to planned giving. Okay, so large gifts are transformational, and donors can be more philanthropic through their state than they can with their current liquidity. But for you also, some people just want to give you their land, right? And they may not be able to do that while they live. They may pass that on to you through their estate. So you probably know better than any other community the real value of planned giving, and you've probably received some planned gifts. So I often get asked from organizations, when should we create a planned giving program? And I have some canned responses that don't necessarily always apply to you as land trusts. So I say, like, when you're established and you have long-term loyal donors. Now, for land trusts, that might not actually be the case, because what you're doing is protecting an asset that a donor wants protected, you might not have to be that established for a donor to be like, yes, this new land trust in my town, I have land, I want to make sure it's protected. I'm going to give it to you in my estate, even though you've only been around for 5 years. So it's a slightly different dynamic for you because some of your donors will inherently understand the value of including you in their estate in a way that other organizations don't necessarily have the benefit of. Also, like when you have savvy, high net worth donors, like if you've got people who are high net worth and very philanthropic, they already have this kind of in their thinking, right? They're already thinking they have enough assets that they're worried about what happens to them when they pass. So being part of that conversation can be really important for them, to trigger for them. Would you like to include our organization in your thinking about that? Are we a high enough priority for you? If you have high net worth donors with assets you want, planting that seed, their heirs may not always want these assets. These assets may be a legal tax liability for them when they pass. There are a lot of benefits to including you, particularly you as land trust, in an estate that's really beneficial to donors. So if you've got some folks, like they have advisors, right? They have, estate planners and tax advisors and financial advisors who can help them kind of walk through all of their options and kind of think strategically about it for themselves. Your job is really to kind of plant the seed with them. And when you have donors who have non-cash assets that you value, like land, that's when you should be thinking about having a program so that you're planting that seed for folks that, yes, we want your land, essentially. So I break down a planned giving program into 4 foundational steps. The first one being, you need to decide what you want to accept. This is essentially a gift acceptance policy. There are a lot of ways that a donor can give to you through their estate, from a simple bequest to including you as a beneficiary on a life insurance plan, to a beneficiary on a 401k, to annuities and charitable remainder trusts. And it gets really complicated. And you don't necessarily want it to be complicated for your organization if you don't have the capacity or expertise to handle certain kinds of gifts. So if you don't have the ability to have an annuity program and you are not interested in being part of a larger annuity pool, then you're not going to accept annuities. And that is a really reasonable thing for smaller, even medium, and even some large nonprofits to decide. It may just not be kind of where you want to be handling, because with annuity, you're giving income back to your donor. So you need mechanisms to do that. But you may also decide that you don't want to accept, particularly some non-cash gifts, right? Not all gifts are created equal. Some have liabilities associated with them, which you probably know really well, because receiving land with buildings on them can be a liability for your organization, and you need to be ready to take on that liability if you accept it. But the same is true for art or antiques. So really thinking through, do you want to accept art? I strongly recommend that not an organization on this webinar, at this conference accepts art, because you probably have no expertise for appraising the art, or for storing the art appropriately, for getting it to auction, for kind of understanding how that whole very complicated process works. It's not something you want to be messing around with. So creating a thoughtful gift acceptance policy, one that is likely approved by your board, because this is the kind of policy a board approves, understanding what you accept and what you don't will really help you, because planned gifts can just land in your lap. And you don't want to be scrambling to figure out what to do with a planned gift if you don't have a gift acceptance policy kind of in place, understanding we don't accept this, we do accept that. Because you don't want to be taking these as one-offs. If some, donor, unbeknownst to you, leaves you a barn full of antiques, what are you going to do with that? Do you even have the capacity or expertise to liquidate that? And you can choose to not accept gifts. That's the beauty of it. Just because somebody wants to leave it to you does not mean you have to accept it. If it's not appropriate for your organization, if it might be a liability for you, there are some gifts that could actually take organizations down. So if you receive art where the provenance isn't clear, like that's a real problem. But once you've received it, you are on title for that. It's like a building. It's like a building that has an in-ground oil tank that has to be removed, right? That's a liability, and it's a huge one, and it's expensive. So not every organization wants to take that on. Think about what you do and what you don't. You need to set up your website for easy use. So, Jane says, it's mentioned on the website. Great. You actually really need it mentioned on the website. And here I have the Greater Boston Food Bank kind of pull down menu of kind of ways they give. And there are lots of ways you can give to the food bank, right? You can donate now. You can be a monthly giver. You can do this. You can do matching gifts. You can do corporate gifts. You can give stock. You can include them in your estate planning. But there are some best practices around this that we don't really have time to go into today. But you want to be thinking, how do you get the information about including your organization in somebody's will? Let's just keep it really simple. How do you get that information to them? Because there's language that your donors need to include in their will. There's language they need to take to their lawyers. And in this day and age, these kinds of things are more automated. Somebody can create a will online for free. Great. If they want to include you in that, they need language from you. How are they getting that? Because they may not, be available to call you during business hours. So is all of that information available on your website? That's the kind of thing you want to be thinking about. Include it on your direct mail reply slip and on your donation page. So I'm going to have an example for this in just a second, but we talked about the importance of reply slips. Reply slips are great marketing tools. This is where you can push monthly giving if that's a priority for your fundraising program. And it's where you can have donors let you know if they've included you in their estate plan. It's also where you can have donors ask for information about including you in your estate plan. You want to capture that information, however donors want to get that to you, having that on your donate page as well, like a checkbox. If your back end allows you to do that, have a checkbox that says, yes, I've included you in my estate. Or it says, yes, I'd like to learn how to include you in my estate. Those are great ways to learn who in your donor pool is thinking about this so that you can follow up and have conversations. And the fourth piece is you have to create a stewardship program specifically for planned giving donors. If you have any kind of program, you need to do this. And you need to do this because what your donors want are to be thanked and appreciated. The problem is when you get this estate gift, they've died. You can't thank them anymore. So having these opportunities for your donors to let you know that they've included you, this is your opportunity to thank them and thank them consistently, because some estate planning gifts can be revised over time. Some can't. But your donor can update their will at any time. And if they don't feel like they've gotten a good experience with the organization, they may take you out. So having a program where you give a really high touch thank you to the folks who are including you in their estate planning is a really important tool for making sure that these folks kind of stay in the fold and stay with you, because those gifts are transformational. Those gifts are big. They're much bigger than what your donors can give you today. And you want to stay in really good graces and keep giving your donors what they want to stay in the estate planning. So in your direct mail reply slip is great practice to say, have a checkbox. I've included the ASPCA in my will. I want to do it. I want to learn more about it. I have already done it. Understanding the difference is actually important, because then who needs the language and who doesn't. Either way, both of those people get stewarded. No matter what box they've checked, you want them to be thanked. Thank you for considering including us in your will and your estate. I have a great colleague who focuses on estate planning, who told me once this really fantastic frame. If you are included in a donor's estate, they are not your donor, you are their family, because that's who they include in their will. That's who they include and take care of in their estate planning. So think of these folks as including you in their family as you're thinking about how you thank them and how you appreciate them. Because I think that really makes it really clear just how critical and important that stewardship piece is. So as I promised, you can download, I have a little checklist around the 4 steps to a planned giving program that kind of walks you through a little bit more of this. I'm going to put it in the chat as well. A friend of mine had to share with me that these QR codes, you can use your mobile phone camera to take you there. It took me a while to figure that out. But I'll just give folks kind of a second with the screen in case you want to grab that landing page. It's also in the chat. My next slide is about how to find me and the fact that I run a monthly Zoom gathering around fundraising each month. And I'm also putting the link in the chat to register for that. We just talk about a different topic each month. It's a lot of fun. It's very informal, very casual, but it's cameras on and something that you engage in. It's not a webinar where I talk at you like I did today. So with that, I'm going to move to my next slide and then let you all see. This is the QR code for my Zoom meeting, but also this is my email. This is my website. This is where you find me. And now I'm going to take us off the share. We can all come back on screen and we've got just a few more minutes for a few more questions.
Yeah, and at the risk of overloading you with links, I'm going to go ahead and post the link to the session evaluation form and encourage folks to fill that out. And also let you know that the slides that Megan just gave have now been uploaded. Thank you, Barbara, to the conference portal. So you may need to refresh the conference portal in order to see them show up there. So you can go ahead and look at the presentation and save that. Okay, go ahead. Questions, comments?
You are welcome to join us on camera if you like, no pressure. But you're also welcome to raise your hand and ask a question and unmute yourself. All right, Robin, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This was a really, really super session. Thank you so much, Megan and Rob, for organizing. One thing that really helps me is to just remember that some people, wealth holders, actually need to offload money.
Yes.
Right. It's just, I have to keep that refrain in the back of my head. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, it does. It is important to keep in the back of your head that it is a real asset for many high net worth folks to give to charity. Getting into the weeds around that gets complicated and you don't necessarily need to, but if you're making a case to a donor about why they should think about giving non-cash gifts to you, a tax advantage is often one of them.
It reminds me, Robin, too, of what Megan said earlier, which maybe is the most useful thing that I learned, is it's not you're not your donors, like your individual issues and preferences are not the same as your donor pool. And that's, I guess we could just remind ourselves of that over and over and over again. Yeah. So
what you're saying, Rob, is I put the exclamation point on the wrong slide. The mindset shift is one of the most important things to do in fundraising because we do kind of come to money with inherent personal fears. All right, Rachel's got something in the chat. We've been debating how necessary personal signatures, notes on letters, whether best appeals versus acknowledgements or both. Does it not make a difference? It's a lot of time making this happen. So want to be strategic. So the more you can personalize, the better. You do have to think about your capacity, but I will say that yes, those personal notes do make a difference. And we have 1 minute, so I don't have the time to go into a personal story about that. But I have to say that, Rachel, I was with you as an executive director. It's a lot of work. I gave myself carpal tunnel one year. I wrote so many things on end of year appeal, and I was writing handwritten letters, like 3-page letters to donors I hadn't been able to meet with actual solicitations, because those are personal relationships. Like, I wrote a lot. At the end of the day, though, it really does matter that personalization matters. And as a donor, I have received personal notes that were just, they were kind of run-of-the-mill personal notes, but they really appreciated me. And in particular, my daughter, when I give on her behalf, because she doesn't have a credit card, she's 10. I often give philanthropically on my donor's behalf. My donor has her own business, so she gives. And I let organizations know that she's the one giving, not me. And the organizations that like acknowledge that and have a personal note, like even though your automation is going to send out a thank you, note to me, organizations that do that handwritten have such a tremendous effect on how I view that organization, how willing I am to give to that organization again.
I saw, Robin, you had your hand up. I don't know, we have just about a second.
Yeah, and I don't mean to bust in. If we need to end, we can end. It was just, the question is simply about board members as donors, deep pocket board members. How important are they these days? Versus going after, relationships with other kinds of donors. Because it's a modern era, and boards need to modernize.
Yeah, I think that's a more complicated question than we have time for. And every organization does kind of look at that a little bit differently. So Robin, you're welcome to follow up with me with more specifics on that.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for attending the conference. And thank you, Megan, for an excellent presentation.